Hello everyone, Ashley here with Ashley Tolton Art. This is section 2 of the artist curriculum series that I'm doing. Today we're going to be talking all about value. So what is value? It is the underlying power of the painting. It is what differentiates between something meh and something truly captivating. So what is it? It's basically just what's light and what's dark, and how light and how dark something is. With that, we're going to be practicing this in our drawings. So we're going to take all the line work and shape work we did, keep working on that, but now add in just one level of complexity by adding values. However, we are going to still keep it very simple by only working with 2 values in this course. Down the line, we will add complexity as we move along. But for this course, we're just doing what is light and what is dark, separating that nice and simple. So now when you're doing this, something to keep in mind is we're going to be going about this in a way that's called mapping. And to map successfully, we're going to separate from what's light and what's dark. But when we're thinking about these shadow objects, I want you to do as few blocks of shadow as possible. And what that means is that when you squint and edges disappear and maybe there's a portion of your reference that fully just kind of, when you squint, just blends together into one shape. Yes, we want to shape that all as one. We're training ourselves to see value and the accuracy of that value, and that sometimes that means there is actually less difference than we think there is. I'm not saying like venture into the light. That's not what I mean. I just mean that if there's surrounding things that are also in shadow, group it all together and shade it all together. Some things that are going to make this easy for you are going to be squinting. Squint at your reference and it'll take the detail out of it so that you are able to really just see the stark contrast between what is light, what is dark. The other thing we're going to keep in mind is the importance of edges, so the specificity of our edges. Because the specificity, and what I mean by that is like, if there's a shadow that goes like this, we're not going to draw a straight line. Yes, we are going to simplify it to some extent, but we want to get some of those changes in there because ultimately that specificity and those line direction changes are what inform you and the viewer of what's going on the surface of the object. It is literally what tells us its spatial orientation in life. Don't get so carried away that that's, overly detailed. The last thing is always to start light. So when you're first sketching everything in, when you're first putting your shadow line in, when you're first sketching in the shadow mark, start light. It's really difficult if you go too dark. So in further episodes, we are going to be adding more complexity, darker values, all of these things. But for now, it's just an introduction. It's just to keep it simple. And again, mastering the simplicity of this is going to help you long term so much more than rushing through it will. So in this first group of kind of exercises and demonstrations, we're going to be working from pretty simple references. Feel free to work alongside me, but as always, feel free to go find your own references and practice from that. In fact, I encourage that so that you're kind of coming across some of these things yourself and picking subject matters that you're interested in. But when you're looking for a reference, I advise looking for something that has a single light source. So it's very obvious what's light, what's dark, no kind of cloudy day, diffusion. You want very, very contrasty photos so that you're able to make these decisions very clearly. Any still life kind of setup is going to be a great source to work from. Let's dive into some demonstration followed by some exercises. I wanted to give you a few examples of what the end result would look like. Overall, you can see very clearly there's one light value and one dark value, and everything is in as much of a block as it can be. And that is the point. So this is kind of like the next step, but it starts with what the last one looked like, where there's just a very, very clear distinction of what's light and what is dark. And I didn't really go too far into the darks in here, but I started with what this left side looks like and how light that was. That's what everything was. And then I just went basically like 1 or 2 steps darker in these darks to make it look a little bit different. So there's more like 2 shadow values here and 1 light value. We will get to that later, but I just wanted to show you that that's how all of these ideas apply, and now we can just get into the actual examples of what we're going to be drawing. I'm going to pull up my reference. Something very simple, but I just want you to remember we're going for what's light and what's dark. So we're looking kind of proportionally. It doesn't really matter because it's like just a sphere, but essentially starting light, and then about that far up is where the background lies. You can put the background in or not. I recommend getting in the habit of doing it because it kind of puts things in place so that it makes sense. It's like that. Got kind of a long shadow here that tapers out, but overall, very nice sphere. Okay, so now that we have this drawing is where we're going in with the lines of like what is light and what's dark. So about right here, remember to follow line specificity. So this doesn't have like much change, but it is on a very specific curve. Like the angle of that curve is very, very specific to tell us how round this shape is. Basically, for me, I look at the darkest line of the shadow and make sure that that's how I want it to be. There we go. And there is a little bit of like an ambient light bounce, which I'll put there just to remind myself. But for now, this is it. And that's basically all of our main shadows. So now we just go in and block them in. And then we'll block this whole shadow shape. Okay, so that's that. I know that looks a little rough and ready, but in order to just make it very clear for our minds, that's how we start, okay? We'll go into greater detail later, but let's do another example. So now we have this one. Now we're getting into a little bit more kind of specific shapes. So let's do where things are like oriented appropriately and specifically. So let's still at a little bit of an angle too. Make sure to honor that angle. Kind of a line like, sorry, a shadow like that, and then back, horizon line is about right there. And then of course we've got the sphere right here, which ends about right there. Let's say it goes to about there. Basically goes right up that edge and curves off. So now that we have our orientation, we're just gonna look more specifically at what these shadows are doing. So I see a big kind of curve right here. I'm gonna point. It does kind of continue, but there must be another bounce light from below. And it kind of goes like this. The rectangle is pretty easy. It's gonna be right there. There is lightness right in there, but we're not gonna worry about that just yet. Okay, back shadow follows that. But now that we have the proportions laid out and we're happy with that, we're gonna do our one light and one shadow value. So in this instance, because the background has value, but so does the shadow. And you don't always want to lose the lines that you have in place. So in rare occasions like this with the initial block in, I will add maybe a little bit of a gradient in the sense where this is where I have the shadow laying, and I might just make that ever so slightly different, or I'm gonna change the direction slightly of the direction I'm moving my pencil in. And that moderate difference just lets me know that there is in fact a line there to respect. So technically we kind of have like 2 shadow values in here, but it's to inform us of the difference in this so that we don't fully forget about it and wash it out. Again, I have a line here for the edge of this rectangle, so I'm shading in a different direction so that I know that that exists. I'm just getting in the biggest shapes possible. If you hear a noise in the background, it's because it's really cold in my studio and I have a heater going just so that I can work somewhat comfortably right now. I'm working on getting an actual heater in here that's like cute and doesn't make a lot of noise, but for now this is what I have, and I do apologize. It will not always be there. Okay, so that's our second one. Nice, simple, 2 values. The last one we're gonna visit is just one step more complex, where now we have these 3 objects. I'm gonna start with a square first. Let's do square. It's kind of at like, this is why I wanted to start with a square, because squares are so specific. Very direct, like that, and then about up there. Then I've got a cylinder in the back, so it's about there, goes to about there. Circle. this shadow shape jumps onto square. Okay, so now we're adding in a little bit of our shadow shapes. It's like a steeper angle that goes about right there. That one's about right there. So then again, it's gonna shade in a subtle background. Doing that in a different direction. Let's go all the way right there. And then there is a little bit on the top. So I'm grouping that in with this side one because this isn't gonna get much darker. This will. So you'll be able to see that difference later, but right now we're just mapping out where everything is. And it is in a shadow, so it gets grouped in with everything. Same with this, and then this side is in shadow. Which we'll group in with its cast shadow. And then this top is actually ever so slightly in shadow. This one ends up being much darker, but we'll add that nuance later. Okay, so that is the start of this first demonstration of value. In the next video, when we talk about shape and form and adding that three-dimensionality to objects, we're gonna go back in to these drawings and really push them further so that they accurately pop off the page. I want you to find as many reference images of spheres, of cylinders, of flowers, plants, anything that is in the direct lighting that we talked about, and just do this many times. Repeat, repeat, repeat. All right, this is the first section of value, keeping it really simple. What's light, what's dark. As always, thank you so much for joining, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.